Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your course on qualitative research, writing, and publishing. So by now we have learned on the basics of qualitative research, and in our previous lesson we also learned about some of the best practices in terms of producing qualitative research of value, and what are the pointers that we have to keep in mind in doing qualitative research, and also in terms of writing qualitative research. So today we are going to, with some examples, look at how to put this into practice when we are producing an article. Right. So in today's lesson, we're going to be taking a lot of examples from some of the publications of me, and I will show you the way to, from the abstract to the conclusion, how to form an article and what are some of the tips that has to be kept in mind when you are writing an article, right? So I'm your instructor, Sarah, and without further ado, let's get started. So if we are to look at some of the very common reasons as to why editors decline qualitative papers, these are 13 of the most general, I would say, reasons that oftentimes either you would get major reviews as a decision, or it may even get rejected or rejected from reviewers. So reason number one is that the author has not related the study to earlier literature, and not just local literature very specific to the context that you're studying, but international multidisciplinary literature. So as I said in our previous lesson, it's very important that you read about your topic, not just within the little bubble, but also from an expansive level of perspectives. So oftentimes, one of the reasons that papers would get rejected is because the paper does not have a proper, or rather a deep, theoretical discussion. And reason number two is the research question is not clearly stated, right? There are times that I myself have reviewed papers, and in the introduction, usually the author needs to clarify what it is that this research is going to explore. And if it is too vague, or if it is written too generally, then it becomes, the research itself becomes not feasible. And then because the research question is not clearly stated, the rest of the paper becomes rather vague, right? So it's important to have this information very clearly stated, that I want to explore this specific question because of these specific reasons stated in the introduction, especially. So, and the third reason is the structure of the paper is not clear, or it does not correspond to the expected structure of that is required by the journal. There was a few times that I again reviewed papers, and I remember there was this one paper that where the authors, what there were things that were discussed in the literature, which were the findings of the paper. And so the findings of the research that was reported in the fourth chapter, the findings chapter of the paper, was also reported in the literature review, and that was very confusing. And so oftentimes, if you go to any journal page, in the guide to authors would clearly state the kind of structure that you have to follow for that journal, to make a submission to that journal. And some journals you have to number it in this way. If it's a main title, it has to be in this way. If it's a subtitle, it has to be in this way. And sometimes you might think, oh, I want to combine the introduction and the literature review section as one, but the journal's requirement might be different. Maybe they require you to separate the introduction and the literature review section. So it's important to make sure that the structure of the paper aligns with the journal. So one of the important aspects is also to kind of keep in mind which journals you want to target for the papers that you're writing, so that you're not completely off the grid, and then you have to go through this hassle of changing so many things towards the end when you're already done with the paper. So it's better to start with knowing which journals roughly you want to target, and kind of get an idea about what is required from these journals before you go into writing. Number 4 is theories, methods, and data analysis are not consistent. And I think this is one of the very common issues that I have seen amongst all the papers that I have reviewed in my career as well, that oftentimes the methodology section and why this methodology was chosen, why these methods were chosen, and how did they go about doing this research is not clearly stated. So it creates doubt about the paper. It creates skepticism, like, why can't the author give more information about how this was done? So a lot of the times in reviewing papers, a significant amount of questions are focused on the methodology and the method section. So it's important to make life easy to clearly state what was done in the research, so that you can go through a smooth process in your reviews. And I'll show you later on which information needs to go into the methodology section, so as to kind of minimize rejections, right? And reason number 5 is the central concepts are not clearly presented or used in a consistent way. So based on your theoretical background, there are certain analytical points within which you are writing the research. Let's say in my research, the theoretical background of the research is based on post-colonial theory. But in my discussion, I'm talking about something completely different, and in my results, I'm talking about something completely different, and in my conclusion, I'm talking about something else. So because there is no central concept or backbone, and it's not consistent, that lack of consistency also leads to rejections. And the methodology section is poor. So this is aligned with point number 4, where you have to explain the process with detailed information. And also you have to explain why such a methodology was chosen, based on what aspects was it chosen. And number 7 is the size of the data set is not defended in a convincing way. So if you just say that, let's say your study was based on interviews, and in your methodology you just say that, I chose qualitative research because of this reason, and the research was conducted based on semi-structured interviews, and we chose to interview 10 people. That's not sufficient information. Why have you chosen 10 people? How did you come to choose these 10 people? What was your sampling technique? And how did you come to conclude that 10 people was enough for the research, right? Because in qualitative research, we have this aspect of theoretical saturation, which is you interview until until there is no need to interview, meaning that you're not getting any new information. So you have to interview until that point of theoretical saturation. So when you are defending, let's say, a size of a sample in your methodology, and you just simply state, oh, I interviewed 10 people, then again it creates skepticism, because you need to justify why why this amount was chosen, why you think this amount is sufficient, and etc. etc. Point number 8 is that the data set is not sufficiently contextualized, or there is a clear selection bias, right? This is also one of the cases, like, okay, let's say you chose 10 people and you just chose those 10 people based on your own gut feeling, right? You just randomly chose those people without any specific method or specific criteria in mind. Then it becomes like it's more biased, right? So if it was someone else, then they would have chosen differently. So if they chose differently, then what is the impact of that on your findings? Would they find the same things, or how what would be the impact of that difference, right? So it's, again, we have to justify uh, all of our decisions in the methodology section, basically. And reason number 9, the data collection is poor and there is lack of validity control. So I explained in our previous lesson about the different aspects of validity that we go into in qualitative research, and I will also explain that with examples today in this lesson. Number 10 is the methods and analysis are not explained clearly enough, which may lead to the referees and the editor to regard the article as too descriptive and the analysis based on too much intuition. So it's important that we also explain how did we go about doing the analysis in a very transparent way. So if you simply mention that, oh, we did a thematic analysis, that doesn't clarify, right? And if you just say that, okay, we did a thematic analysis and these are the three themes that we came up with, but how did you come to these three themes? How did you analyze? How many levels of coding did you do? Did you do it alone, or did few people do it together and come to discuss the differences in your findings, and etc. etc. And how did you put different codes together to come up with the themes? So you have to kind of provide this audit trail of things, so that in order for you to provide confidence about your study and confidence about your research data to the reader, right? And point number 11 is that the author makes unsound conclusions or unfounded generalizations. So in the results section, let's say your study was based on interviews, and in the results section, uh, after having explained the analysis methods in the methodology section, in your results section, you need to kind of give quotes of what was the basis for these themes. So you would bring different quotes of things that people have said to include, so that the reader knows how you came to these conclusions, right? So based on these, if what you're saying in the results section, or what you have shown in the results section doesn't align, and if you're saying something completely different in the conclusion section, then you need to kind of justify and show to the reader how did you come to these conclusions, right? Because sometimes when you're writing, it could be that you're kind of in your own zone, and there's a lot of things that may make sense to you because you're the one who has been in the ground, you read all this literature. So there may be pointers that make sense to you, but to someone who is reading your research newly, it may not make sense to them. So it's important that when we are writing, that we write in a way that we are not just in our own head, but we are also thinking about the reader, right? So when we are making different points, we have to make sure that our points are actually consistent, that there is a narrative flow to our points, and that together it makes sense, right? And point number 11 is that ethical rules are violated or ethical issues are not mentioned or adequately discussed. So I spoke about this in our previous lesson as well. It's important. Reflexivity is one way of discussing how, as a researcher, you are mindful of yourself. And then there are ethical aspects that you need to take into consideration if the research involves other cultures, other people, and etc., etc. So you need to incorporate these ethical aspects as well, which we'll see in the examples later on. And then lastly is that the text is too long, right? And I would say one of the major skills that we need to learn in terms of writing journal articles is to synthesize our ideas into shortly, right? To be able to summarize, to be able to uh, put 4 pages of text into one small paragraph, right? Or even 100 ideas into one small paragraphs. We need to be able to summarize, right? Because you can, to make a point, you can go on and on and on and on to make that point, or you can make the same point with the same impact within a sentence, right? And part of the kind of limitation of journal articles is the number of words. It's a very small number of words, so we really need to learn how to summarize our ideas, right? And if the text is too long, then and especially if it goes beyond the expected structure of the journal, usually it's a desk rejection, right? So before writing, in order to kind of address not all of these issues, but some of these issues, before you go into any form of writing, I think you need to kind of realize and ask yourself about your own interests, where your interests are, because it's much easier to write about things that you're passionate about than things that are completely outside of your interest, right? and and once you know your research interest, whichever field that you're going into, whichever topic that you're writing into, it's important that you thoroughly know your field, so that no matter the kind of questions you get, you would know how to go about these questions. And so it's important that you read about your topic from different disciplines, so you have an overall overall understanding about the issue in general. So it's important to know your field, meaning the authors who write about different topics in your field, and the limitations of your field, and the theories that has been used and the limitations of those theories, and what needs to be done, and what perspectives have has been used, and what perspectives are missing, etc., etc. Right? And you need to really know about your research context. Let's say you want to study about sustainable tourism in Malaysia, right? So you need to understand what sustainability means in the context of that Malaysia is still, the context is wide. So let's take a smaller context. Let's say you want to understand the ideas of sustainable tourism in a specific indigenous community in Malaysia. So you need to really understand that community's worldviews and their understanding, and etc., etc. But before anything, you need to know the cultural context, right? The specifics of that culture. Whichever culture, whichever context you're going into, it's important to know the context, because if not, if you don't have the background or the context, the knowledge about the context, you may interpret things differently because you're an outsider. And as an outsider, you have your own beliefs. And if you don't have the cultural context, then that means you may be interpreting these people and their perspectives from your own standing, right? And then the research value. What is the value of your research? If you truly know the value of your research, then you would be able to defend your research in any way, right? So it's important that you know what is, this is also related to the contribution to knowledge. What is new about your research? What is so grand about your research? What's the value of your topic? What is it that you're trying to develop? And what's the impact of what you're trying to develop? So it's important that you know the value so that you can defend it in an article that you write, you can defend it in any context. And it's also important for you to think about the researcher specific. This is where reflexivity comes in, and we spoke about this grandly in a previous lesson as well. So before you go into the field, before you start writing your research, it's important that you know where you stand, where your subjectivities are, where you are positioned, and how these aspects may influence your research. It's important to know these things, right? So, what are some of the major aspects that has to be incorporated when you are producing a paper, a qualitative paper? And these are this is just based on my perspective, and this is some of the aspects that must be incorporated in terms of producing something of quality. And one is a well-rounded abstract, a critical review of previous literature, and as I said before, in qualitative research, it cannot be that you're just simply reporting previous work that has been done in the field by saying, oh, person ABC study found this, person Z study found this, but in person Z study, it wasn't like this, and in person ABC studies, it wasn't like this, and etc. No, it has to be a critical review of previous literature where you can incorporate actually multiple studies and say that in terms of these perspectives, these authors have discussed uh, element A, B, C. However, uh, uh, these are the elements that needs to be incorporated or missing, and kind of critique the ways that previous studies have missed out certain elements. And yeah, and a theoretical basis, it's important to kind of have a analytical viewpoint for your study instead of a general study. So are you going in, are you analyze, is this a feminist perspective, is it a post-colonial perspective, or whatever the theoretical basis is? It's important to have an analytical lens. Number four is a clearly presented methodology and methods, a detailed description of the analytical methods applied and how they were used, and a presentation of the findings in a way that you are guiding the reader through your story with your findings, and a critical discussion which is against the literature and also your findings and the limitations. It's important to emphasize on the limitations because there is not one study in this world that is done that doesn't have limitations. Every study is limited in whether it's theoretically or methodologically, right? Every study has its limitations, so it's important to be transparent about these limitations. In general, a typical article is between about 6 to 7,000 words, and there are some journals, also very good journals, that allow up to about 9,000 to 10,000 words, and some which are open. But when I say open, it doesn't mean that someone could write 20,000 words and they'll be okay with it. No. As I said, in research articles, it's important to synthesize ideas because nobody really wants to read an article that's like 60 pages long, right? Maybe in certain fields, but I haven't come across a paper like that. Yeah. So the most common is this range of 67,000 words, and I have just broken it down here. But I want to emphasize here that this is only a rough guide, and this very much depends on your topic, the kind of methods you have used, the kind of data that you have, and the kind of analysis that you have done in your study. It's very much dependent on that. But this is just a rough guide about about how you can kind of break down these 67,000 words into the different sections, right? All right. And so let's move on into how to organize a research article. So these are the papers that I would be using in the discussion that follows after this. So I would suggest if you want to follow it closely, I would suggest for you to perhaps download these papers or access them online. So when we're discussing the different sections, you can actually go into the paper if you want to look more closely, right? And so in this paper, actually, the reason why I have chosen these papers is because it uses different methodologies. So I wanted to give perspectives based on different kinds of papers. So in the first paper, which I also bought in our previous lesson, it's based on a reflective diary. The second paper is based on visual analysis of Instagram pictures. And the third paper is based on focus groups with PhD students. The fourth paper is based on interviews, semi-structured interviews with academics in Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the fifth paper is based on ethnographic interviews as well with adventure travelers. Right. So let's first look at, so basically I'm gonna go through go through the lesson based on what we have, what I have included here, starting from an abstract all the way to the limitations. So let's start with abstract. What should be a part of an abstract? An abstract should, at the minimum, give a background and an overview or a very summarized idea about your research aims, the sample, or rather the research sample, and the methods, and a brief overview of your results. So let's look at the first example, right? So first, you can start by saying that in this abstract, we are starting off by saying what has been done and what hasn't been done, but in a very short sentence. So, although post colonial analysis examined the sexualized imagery of women in tourism have been conducted, so in short, we are mentioning what has been done. Previous studies have predominantly focused on gender and post-colonial from a patriarchal perspective, right? So in a brief sentence, we mentioned that this is what has been done, but what has been done has predominantly been based on this one perspective. By doing so, other neocolonial power asymmetries such as race, class, ethnicity have often been neglected. So, in this process of taking this one perspective, all of these other aspects have been neglected. So, by doing this, we have now given a very impactful sentence on why our study is important, right? And that's where it's gonna come to in this after this sentence. So, this paper mobilizes post-colonial feminist theory to expand the existing analysis and discourses concerning gendered representations in tourism. So, we started off by saying that the things that have been done, it has been done in this way, and only this one perspective has been taken into consideration in what was previously done. And in this process of what has been done, all of these other aspects have been neglected. And then we move on to say what this study does to address that gap. So we are taking post-colonial theory, and then we come in to explain how we are going to do this. Through a narrative analysis of the images published in the official Instagram page of Sri Lanka's Ministry of Tourism, we contend that the images produced and circulated to promote Sri Lanka in many instances echo essentialist gendered binaries, right? So, and then we are giving a background about our methods and also our findings. We have put it together in one simple sentence, right? But we are, instead of just mentioning that, oh, we found this, we are also giving emphasis on to what new thing we have found, which is, however, as the images tend to produce and reiterate Sri Lankan national identity through a hegemonic Sinhalese Buddhist discourse, they also show the intersections between gender and other asymmetries of power in reproducing post colonial gendered identities. By saying this, we have connected it to the gap that we emphasized in our first two sentences, right? So basically, in your abstract, an abstract is a very synthesized idea about your whole research, but it has to be something that captures the eye of the reader. It has to be something that very much in a very summarized way gives you an essence of what the research is. It's like reading the back of a book, right? How many of you, when you go to a bookstore, that is, if you go to bookstores and if you read books, how many of you actually choose a book or put down the book based on what is written at the back of the book, right? The saying comes from don't judge the book by a cover, right? But still, a lot of people, when you're choosing a book, you tend to read the back of the book. And whatever that is, if what is written on the back of the book doesn't capture your eyes, it doesn't capture your mind, then oftentimes you don't choose the book, right? So an abstract is somewhat similar to that. An abstract should be able to capture capture the essence of the research in a very impactful way. So it's better to give an analysis, give an overview. This is one way of writing an abstract, right? Where you give an overview of what is done, what what has not been done, what, or rather what's the limitation of what's been done, and then come to explain, but in this research we are going to do this, and through doing this we have found this altered or rather new insights into, and thereby you're contributing to this lack of knowledge that exists in this specific area, right? But as a minimum, your abstract should give a background, aims, sample, methods, and results. Okay? This is another example of an abstract, right? This paper is based on a reflective diary. So let's see how the abstract is here. The coloniality of power in tourism has been a topic of discussion among researchers in the field since the late 1970s. So it starts by saying, this topic has been researched from a very long time, right? But a general lack of narratives that underpin the experience of critical scholars and the challenges and limitations of research in power itself still prevails, right? So again, it's giving an impact whereby you're saying this topic has been researched for a very long time, but this aspect of this knowledge has been completely ignored, right? So because of that, we don't know about this specific aspect of this, of what it is to research colonialism. So now you have given a very uh, uh, depth, actually very in-depth background into, okay, this has been done, but although it has been done since the 1970s, for more than 40, 50 years, this aspect of it hasn't gotten any attention. Then you come to explain that, oh, that's what this paper is going to do. So this paper narrativizes my reflection as an early career female Asian tourism scholar who explored the colonial and neo-colonial structures of power in Southeast Asian tourism knowledge production and dissemination. So you explain that since this hasn't been done, now you are going to do it in this research. So, the discussion in this paper paves the path for critical tourism researchers to ponder on the deep aspects of identity that has been socialized in historical and political processes. And then, after saying that this is what you are going to do in order to address this gap, you emphasize on the contribution of the paper and how it would help this field to progress further. So, and then the discussion also presents the limitations and challenges researchers encounter in the agenda of academic decolonization. In this sentence, I actually uh, interlinked this paper to a much larger agenda that exists in the academia, right? So it's so this is another way of writing an abstract. But again, if you notice, the similar kind of information still exists, right? This is another example. And as you can see, if I compare it to this abstract, the first one, this abstract is very short. And that's also because in some journals you might have a space of 250 words to write your abstract, but in some journals it's only 150 words. So it really uh, based on the structure that is required from the journal, you might be pushed to summarize and summarize more. So in this again, we give an overview of what has been an issue for a very long time, but an aspect of the issue that has been missing from the academic discussion, and then move on to explain in this paper, we are going to explore and address this lack of information or lack of knowledge that exists with regards to this topic. And then we are going to do this by speaking to these people and etc. And then this is what we have found. So you're giving an overview of the whole paper to kind of produce interest in the reader to continue to read, right? Okay, then we come into the introduction. So, in the introduction, really, what you have to do is you have to tell a very short and concise story, right? You have to take the reader through a narrative and in a very concise manner. Okay, this is the research that has been done, and but these aspects are lacking, and it's important. Why is it important to focus on these aspects? Why is it important to focus on this gap, and how you're going to go about filling this gap in knowledge through your research? So you need to emphasize and convince the gap in knowledge. So as I said, sometimes what you're saying makes sense in your head, but it may not make sense to someone else. So you need to write in a way that it's actually apparent, it's visible to another person as well, that yes, this issue hasn't been addressed properly before, and thereby we need more research in this area. You need to convince someone that we need more research in this area, and in order to do that, you need to emphasize on what's been done and what's not being done, what the problem is, what the gap is, and the importance of your current research, and then come to explain the research objectives, how it is conducted, and why. Often in the last paragraph of the, you would start by saying, uh, in a very concise way, what research has been done in the wider disciplinary areas, what research has been done in the topic in your very specific discipline area, and then in general what's been missing. It could be that your topic has been discussed in other disciplines, but in your discipline, the discussion has been very limited to a very specific perspective, and all other perspectives have been neglected. So you emphasize that. So, wider disciplinary, your own discipline, and the problem with the existing research. And then that paragraph should end with you emphasizing on the gap, and then you come in to explain what you're going to do with this research, your research objectives, and how you're going to go about conducting this research. So, in the last paragraph, you will also put an emphasis on your methodology and your methods. And sometimes authors would often include a brief into a brief reflexive statement in the introduction as well. But often this would be your flow in the introduction. And as I mentioned before, the ability to summarize and still keep the depth of ideas is a must have skill for a qualitative researcher, right? And what should your research questions be like? Your research questions need to convey to someone what does it actually explore? What is it that you're going to explore? And the nature of what you're going to explore, the phenomena, right? So what is the nature of what you are exploring, and what aspect of this phenomena do you want to explore, and why is it important to explore this aspect? And so you need to frame it, the explorative framing, and explain these aspects of your research question. What is the nature of the phenomena? Why do you want, which aspect of the phenomena do you want to explore? And why is it important to explore this aspect specifically, according to you, right? So let's look into how to write a literature review, or how to organize a literature review. Right? This is based on my own experience, and based on my experience, I would say this is the way that I would like to approach a literature review, which is like a funnel approach. You start from the wider disciplinary basis and you narrow it down to your specific topic. So I like to start off with the wider disciplinary basis. Let's say you want to study the aspect of what can we choose? You want to study about gender issues in tourism marketing. Okay, let's focus on that. Let's say you want to study gender issues in tourism marketing, and so instead of instead of starting the literature uh, with looking at gender and tourism, which is very specific, right? You need to go into the wider literature, which is gender and marketing, or gender in general, gender issues in general, right? That might be too general. So you can actually narrow it down to gender issues and marketing. And in this section, you would be bringing forth literature from different disciplines to give an aspect of what has been discussed in the wider literature about gender and marketing, right? Or gender and media, gender and advertising, right? So the literature section should, in my perspective, start with a wider disciplinary critique or discussion of the topic, and then after that, so that's the starting point of the funnel. Then you narrow it down to discuss the topic within the discipline. So you can start to, let's take the same topic. So now you've started with gender and marketing. Now you can come into gender and tourism marketing, right? Or gender issues in tourism. Okay, you can come to that. And then you go narrower. Narrower would be you come to study gender issues in tourism marketing. And then the last would be if, let's say, your study is based on a specific case, then you need to give a background about that case as well. Let's say you're studying about gender issues in tourism marketing in Asia, or too wide. Or let's say, let's choose a case. Let's say you want to study it in India, right? So you need to give a background of gender and these aspects of your topic in terms of that case. Gender in India, or gender issues in India, or give an overview of Indian cultural politics, and etc. So it takes a funnel approach where you start from the wider literature, wider disciplinary literature, and then you narrow it down further, right? And then the more you narrow down, the more specific and closer you come to your topic. But it's important to start at the wider level. So let's take an example. This is from the paper, which is based on focus groups with PhD students. So the objective of this paper was to understand how historically colonial, and contemporary neo-colonial or capitalist structures influence the knowledge production process in Asia, in Asian educational systems. And so we wanted to study from the next generation knowledge producers perspective, which is the doctorate students who are the next generation knowledge producers, right? So in our literature, so in order to discuss the wider disciplinary basis, we started by giving an overview of what Eurocentrism and capitalism is. And then we also gave an overview of what Eurocentrism, capitalism, and academic knowledge is. So, what has been discussed in the wider literature, wider disciplinary literature about these aspects of Eurocentrism, capitalism, and academic knowledge. So, we brought in literature from political science, sociology, anthropology, psychology, etc., etc., right? And it was a big discussion that has been an overview of a big discussion that has been going on in different disciplines. And then we come in to discuss about what has been discussed in terms of tourism knowledge, which is our specific area in this research. We're looking at tourism knowledge producers, right? So our next literature topic was tourism knowledge and power. So what has been discussed in terms of power structures in knowledge creation in tourism? And then we came in to discuss the type of ideologies that exist in knowledge creation for next generation knowledge producers, or what has been done in terms of next generation knowledge producers, which are doctorate students. What research has been done about them, right? And what's lacking in this research area. So, and then lastly was our study site. But the contextual information about our study site, we didn't include it in our literature section. We actually included in our methodology section. So it's really up to you. There was another paper, which was the post-colonial paper based on visual material. In that, we included the case aspect in the literature section and not in the methodology section. So you can be flexible in this area. But the general idea is that a literature review must be not just about your own discipline, but also wider disciplinary knowledge, right? This is another example taken from the post-colonial feminist analysis paper. So in terms of the wider disciplinary basis, we started our literature off with post-colonial by giving an overview of what post-colonial theory is and what has been discussed about post-colonial theory from different disciplines and how it has been discussed and etc. And then come into because we are looking at a post-colonial feminist analysis. So we came to discuss post-colonialism and feminism, what has been discussed in under these topics. But again, we brought literature from different disciplines to discuss here. And then the last section of this literature section, we spoke about what has been discussed in terms of post-colonial and feminism in tourism. So instead of having another whole section for this topic, we combined it under this one topic by first discussing about this topic from a wider disciplinary perspective, and then narrowing it down where the last two paragraphs of the literature were based on post-colonial and feminism in tourism. Okay, and then the last section was about Sri Lanka, which is the case. And so we gave a background into nationalist history, where in terms of colonialism, gender identities, and tourism. So even when you're giving a background into the case, it's not that you're just talking about the country like in general or giving demographic details or population details about the country. No, you have to give a background about the case based on the topic, right? So the idea is that you're telling the reader that this is the specific cultural context with regards to the topic that exists under this case. So you have to give the reader an overview of what the situation is with regards to the topic in the country, right? So that's another example. So these are some of the pointers that you can keep in mind when you are doing your literature review. All right, how to ground your study in the relevant literature. You need to look at what research has been done previously. What have you learned from reviewing the literature? What are the dominant and minor ideas, theories in what you have reviewed? Can you describe with illustration what those theories are? Are the theories compatible or incompatible with each other? So these different theories that people have using, or different perspectives that have been brought about by different literature, are they coherent? Are they consistent? Or are they going in different directions? And if so, why? And what are your own views in relation to the theories? And are there any flaws in the existing literature, and etc.? This is where your own criticality comes in. This is a tool that you can use in terms of doing your literature review. I understand that everyone has their own way of doing things, and if I try to do something like this, probably wouldn't work for me. I have my own way of working my literature. But this is a tool that has been suggested for students, where you actually you can do this on an Excel file, and for each article that you're reading, and this actually gives you a record of what you're reading as well, because sometimes when you're reading a lot of things, you might actually lose sense of what you've already read, right? So it gives you an opportunity to keep track of what you have read as well. So for each article, you will have a different column, and then you can note down the objectives, the research questions, methods, theories, conclusions, and limitations of each paper. And this section is where you write your own thoughts about this article, right? So this is a tool that you can use if you want in order to conduct your literature review. Okay. Okay, and as I have emphasized before, writing the literature is not just about reporting what has been done, but about critiquing. And the things that you can critique is the argument or the logic of the paper, the methods. You can critique the methods, the theories that have been used, the ideas, the application of these theories and ideas, and the stability of these ideas in the context of the knowledge, and established beliefs, values, and systems, and how these may be influencing the research that has been done, and the context of the knowledge, and the time within which it was done, right? So these are some of the things that you can critique. So, for example, if you're someone who researches into the topic of race or genetics and etc, like few hundred years ago, when especially during colonial times, when there was this ideological belief that some one race is superior than other races, a lot of the text that was written during that time emphasized on was based primarily based on this belief that, oh, this one race, this white race, is superior than all other races. So a lot of the knowledge that was created was based on this fundamental belief. But today, obviously, people would critique these aspects, right? So you need to also pay attention to the times within which knowledge was created as well, and you can use these as pointers to critique. All right. Let's look into methodology and methods. Which aspects need to be incorporated, and or how to align your methodology and methods in a consistent way that it makes sense. So, in your methodology, before you come into explaining the specifics of your methods, you need to first explain why and what. Why you want to use this specific methodology, and what aspects are you using. And this has to be aligned with your research objectives as well. So, as you can see here, we're giving an overview about what method we are using, which this study is based on a narrative analysis, but specifically a visual narrative analysis. So before speaking about visual analysis, we are first giving a brief overview of what narrative analysis is, but also emphasizing that narrative analysis has traditionally been applied to text, whereas this aspect of visual narrative analysis has been ignored in research mostly. And then you give an overview of what visual analysis is, and the importance of visual analysis, and what visual analysis can actually contribute that is different from textual analysis, right? And then it also emphasizes on specifically that visual narrative analysis have been relatively understudied or underestimated in the specific disciplinary area of tourism, and that in this study we are going to use this method, right? So you're giving an overview of what this analysis is, and what contribution does this method has, and how it has not been used before, and why you want to use it now. So emphasizing why we want to use it, we are also putting ourselves in in this argument by saying that we share the view that photographs are pivotal to explore human experiences and feelings in tourism, as they tell stories about people and places. Based on this premise, this study employs photos to explore gendered representations, right? And then we emphasize by saying how this study would be different from what has been done before, and and uh, bringing into context how it is different, right? So let's say you want to do this, you do your study in a qualitative way, then you first need to explain what qualitative research is and why qualitative research is is the most suitable for your research questions or for your research objectives or for your research in general, right? And then, so this is an example. This research draws on a qualitative methodology which was concerned with the ways in which individuals experience their engagement with outdoor adventure tourism activities and how we might understand this experience in relation to their understanding of the environment and their psychological well-being. So you need to emphasize how qualitative method may aid the process of exploring what you want to explore and why you think this is the most suitable methodology, and you need to emphasize that here. And the same goes for your methods as well. If you want to do interviews, if you want to do specifically semi-structured interviews, then you need to emphasize and explain why you think that is the most suitable for this study, right? And then I'm going to bring the framework that we discussed in our previous lesson in terms of providing validity for qualitative research, which is the TACT framework, starting with trustworthiness. And we discussed yesterday what aspects needs to be incorporated in order to produce these different aspects. So this is a part of the research from the methodology taken from the paper on exploring beliefs of Asian tourism academics in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, right? So in our methodology, we emphasize on the questions that we asked that are related to our objective 1 and our objective 2. And we also emphasize on what kind of questions we asked the participants of the study, right? So we emphasize here what questions we asked. And then we also emphasize on what other aspects we discussed in our interviews, right? And so this is all related to what we have discussed in our literature as well of the paper. And then we also emphasize here by saying in our study, we applied multiple strategies to build trustworthiness by following the criteria described by Lincoln and Guba. And then we give specifics into what aspects we established in terms of producing trustworthiness, including prolonged engagement with the participants, persistent observation of groups dynamics, triangulation of data through document analysis, observation, and interviews, historical analysis to kind of get an understanding of what the participants are saying. And all of these aspects brings more trust, credibility, and trustworthiness to your data. And peer debriefing, as I explained in our previous lesson, is where, so there were two authors involved in this process. So we each came into regular discussions about our findings and member checks, where we sent out the transcription back to the participants for them to validate what we have found. In terms of auditability, right, where you need to clearly state how the data was collected, where it was collected, when, and how the analysis was undertaken, and etc. So someone should be able to follow you through the entire process. So we explained by saying that we conducted 24 semi-structured interviews across these different places, and participants were selected using this sampling method. And then we are explaining step-by-step process of how we found these participants and how they came to be participants in this research. And then we are also giving information as to in which language the interview was conducted, and that the participants were provided with the option of conducting the interview in their own language. and why they were given that option as well, but that also that all participants opted to do the interview in English, right? Similarly, here as well, this is the research that was based on the Instagram images. We give specifics as to when the data was collected by giving the very specific date at point when we collected the pictures. And at the time when we collected the pictures, the number of total pictures on the page was this. And since we are only focusing on gendered representations, we only included pictures where there were people in the pictures. So we also explain why we only included pictures that had people. And then we got a total of 284 photos posted from this date to this date, which is the total after removing duplications, right? And and then we are also giving an outlook of which aspects of the pictures we collected into our database, which is on top of the pictures, we got their captions, the dates, the number of likes, and the hashtags related to the images, right? So you need to give a very detailed overview of what you did, how you did, and the aspects of the data that you collected and why, right? And then we give an overview of how we coded this data and reason why we coded it that way, right? And in terms of ethical steps, let's say you are doing interviews, then you need to give an overview of what ethical steps did you take to kind of protect your participants and also to protect the researcher. So in terms of interviews, we list out by saying that a consent form was given to each participant, and that the interview questions were also emailed to the participants before the interview itself, and the interview questions were actually part of the research article as well, where we gave it in as an appendix. And we also give an overview of how the interviews were structured, so that people know which aspects, the reader knows which aspects we went into, and also the questions that we asked. So if they had to follow the same interview process, they could. And then we give the interviews were audio recorded with the full consent and acknowledgement of the participants, and then transcribed verbatim. And and we also mentioned and emphasized by saying that notes were taken during the interview, and that one of the authors maintained a reflective diary after each session. And there were no language corrections done to the quotes of the participants. Only minor language corrections were performed, but not correction to the point that the meaning of what was said changes, right? So these are some of the steps that needs to be kept in mind in terms of ethics, and but it also very much depends on your research methodology, context, and design. But either way, we have to report these elements in the articles under the methodology section. And it's also important to, especially in qualitative research, to have this reflexivity aspect where you position yourself, and if there are other authors, your other co-authors as well. So for example, here we specifically mentioned that this work is guided by an interpretivist paradigm, which ontologically contemplates etc etc. So we emphasize on what the ontological epistemological belief of an interpretivist is, and the methodological emphasis of this paradigmatic belief. And then we emphasize that because of our paradigmatic belief, we also believe that it's important to reflexively situate ourselves meaning the authors, within the text. And we give a brief background about each author, but in relation to the topic that we are studying, right? So the first author is a European scholar based in Malaysia, whose work has focused on epistemological issues. And the first author is the second author's PhD supervisor, and the second author's background is this. So your reflexive aspect has to be aligned with the research itself. So it's not that, oh, if you're studying about uh, if you let's say you're studying about something about gender, then you give into the gendered cultural background of the author. It doesn't mean that you speak about something completely different about yourself that has no relation to the topic, because you have to keep in mind that number of words are limited, right? So in your reflexivity, you position yourself as per the topic, as per the subject of your research. Similarly, this is another example where we position ourselves within a paradigm and we give a background of each author, again in relation to the topic that is at hand. So here we are studying about uh, knowledge structures in terms of PhD tourism PhD students. So we give a brief background with relation to the topic to each author. And this is also one way of saying, what authority do you have, right, as an author? What background do you have to talk about this topic? Because if you're someone who has no complete relation to the topic, then what credibility do you have in order to talk about this topic at depth, right? And if you don't have any relation to the topic whatsoever, then you need to discuss how this may influence the research itself, right? And then there's credibility. So uh, it's about the analysis, the different aspects of the analysis, how you did it, and what things did you keep in mind when you were conducting the analysis, right? So we took, in terms of our analysis, we followed this person's guide and looked into three different things, right? So, and then because we are following this person's guide, we explain how we followed this guide, very specific in our study. And then we explain by saying that one author collected the data in this way, another author we analyzed in this way, and if two people were involved in the process of analysis, then how did we come together to discuss, and how did we combine our different perspectives, and etc. So we explain this step by step. Okay, so for example, first the photos and the captions were analyzed separately to understand the general narrative behind the promotional material. In the second phase, each photo was analyzed along with the caption and hashtags to understand the narrative it attempts to portray. A few themes emerged through symbols and repeated words, while the first and second steps of the analysis were conducted individually by each author. The third phase involved discussions between the three authors, right? And And furthermore, as we believe that our way of seeing is highly organized within a specific cultural and neural conditioning, it was necessary, we found it necessary to code individually and then come together and discuss, right? Because all three of the authors of this paper were coming from different backgrounds. And so we coded it differently, and then we came together to discuss. And the reason why we found it important to do it this way is so as to understand the kind of different ways of seeing and why it was, which I believe added more value to this research. So we explained step by step how we did the analysis, why we did it this way, and the different stages of the analysis, right? And then you have to explain about the audit trail as well. If you did interviews or focus groups, then how did you transcribe this data? How did you analyze this data? How, if one person did it or more than one person did it, and what was the analysis process, how many stages of the analysis existed, and etc., etc. Basically, what you have to keep in mind in the methodology section is that whatever you do in terms of conducting your fieldwork, you need to report it. You need to summarize that information and report it in your methodology section so that it makes sense. And you need to explain the whys of the decisions you made. Why is it that you chose qualitative research? Why is it that you chose this specific method? Why is it that you chose this specific analysis method? And so give details onto what you did and why you did it in the methodology section, right? And then if you have done focus groups or you have done interviews and etc., then you need to also provide a profile of the participants. But the information that you include in this profile has to be contextualized to the study, right? It depends on the study. So here, this is a table that I've taken from the study about adventure tourism, where our objective of the study was to understand if and how adventure tourism or if and how adventure tourism promotes pro-sustainable behavior, right? So it was important for us to give a background based on gender, age, nationality, that is the general background, but also very specifically what type of adventure activity these participants engage in and for how many years they have been engaging in this type of activity, right? Because this provides context for the reader in terms of interpreting our data, right? And then obviously in your methodology as well, don't forget to mention the limitations of your methods and methodologies, right? And before you move on to write your findings sections, it's important that you know what you have learned from your data, right? So the first step is to clarify for yourself what you know as a result of your research. And at this stage of research, I would say, especially when you're coming to your analysis, you would be reading and rereading and going through your data multiple times to the point that it would be ingrained in your head, right? So you kind of know it by heart. And then, based on what you know, you can think about your research questions and try to align it and try to see the narrative that has come about, the story that you have come to find from your data, from your field work. And then think about how do you want to present this story that you have found. In which way can you present this story? Because a story can be presented in many ways, right? So it's very much unique to you. How do you want to present this story, these findings of your research, right? And often in qualitative research, in your findings, you would give best examples of your findings. So let's say you did the thematic analysis and you are discussing every theme. Then under each theme, you would give best example, like quotes from participants. I'll show you in the coming. So, at the beginning of your findings, right, when you're starting off, it's not that directly. You can also directly go into each theme and discuss it under each theme, or you can start off by giving a general background where you are kind of summarizing what you have said so far in your introduction and your literature, and then you start connecting your findings there. So it's really up to you how you want to write your story. But you can start the story by giving an overview and then come into the specific themes or findings of your research, right? So this is in terms of representation of findings, it very much depends on the analysis methods and the type of data you have. So in this paper, which was based on a visual analysis, we provided under each theme, we provided different tables where we listed down the pictures, and alongside the picture, we also listed the quote that followed the picture on Instagram, right? And so under each theme, we presented an overview of some of the pictures that made up that theme. So the readers also have an idea about how we came to this theme, right? So it's also a way of providing transparency to the reader and also giving them an opportunity to interpret for themselves. This is another way. So in this way, we have done a thematic analysis. So under each theme, we are providing quotes, right? And in terms of providing quotes, you also have to make sure that the person who's reading knows who is saying this quote, not in terms of name, but in terms of who the participant's background profile is. So in this paper, we actually gave a table before we came into this section. In the methodology, we gave a table of the participant's profile, so that when we say P3, participant 3, then the reader can actually refer back to the participant profile and know who is saying uh, these different aspects or these different quotes, whose voice it is, right? So you need to give best examples, you need to give quotes of how did you come to these themes. So you're kind of elaborating the story, and in order to elaborate the story, you need to provide quotes, right? And this is also a way of providing transparency into how you came to these themes as well. All right, now we come to the discussion. So, the overall purpose of your discussion is to build a theoretical story of your work. It is here that you compare and contrast your empirical findings with the established literature. This means that you explain how your findings are similar or different from the literature that you have reviewed in the previous sections. So, in this section, it's highly unlikely that, or it's not recommended that you bring so much of new citations into this section, which you haven't introduced in the literature section. So in this section, basically what you are doing is that you are critically discussing your findings against the theoretical backbone of the study. So if you introduce a lot of new literature in this section without having discussed in the previous literature review section, then your study becomes inconsistent, right? And then it's unbalanced, right? So it's okay to bring in new literature here, but not something that is completely out of what you have discussed in the literature review. Then, if that's the case, then you have to go back and kind of uh, revise your literature again, right? So in this section, it's important that you are critical and you think about the contribution of your study, and you need to emphasize on this contribution under the discussion, right? Where you connect, uh, again, it's like writing a story where you connect the what has been done before and then the findings of your research and a critical discussion of both of these aspects, right? And then the last section is your conclusion, right? And in your conclusion, you are kind of combining and synthesizing the whole idea of the paper, or the central backbone of the paper. What is it that you have found, and how, what is the implication of what you have found for your discipline and for the wider disciplinary knowledge, right? So you need to combine the story and remark on the implications of what you have found on the wider discipline, literature, academy, and industry, right? Discuss the extent to which the findings with the data set may be relevant to the understanding of other situations. So it's not, again, that, oh, you're looking at it in terms of, let's say, let's bring the example of gender and tourism marketing. So when you're concluding, it's not that you're just speaking about gender and tourism marketing, but also the implications of that in on other aspects of gender issues that exist, right? And aligning it with the other aspects of gender issues that exist in the wider societal aspect. And then you need to synthesize and relate to the issues that has been raised through the theoretical basis. So it has to be that your conclusion has to be coherent with the rest of your paper and not something completely outside, right? And it should be concise. You should be able to give a very impactful statement, and because the conclusion is just as important as everything else. And if you haven't drawn the proper conclusions from your findings and from your theoretical discussion, then the reviewers would emphasize on this, that it's not capturing the essence of the paper. So it should be able to capture the essence of the paper in a way that you are aligning that you state what you have found, what is the implication of what you have found to the direct gap that you have emphasized in your paper, and then what is the implication of what you have found for the wider issues that exist in relation to your topic. And then last part of the conclusion is obviously where you give your recommendations for future research and recommendation in terms of industry as well, depending on the kind of topic that you're going into, right? And I would say conclusion is also an area where you need to be creative. Creative in which sense? In a sense of writing in a very impactful way, or writing in a way that captures the audience, right? And this is one of the major skills that a qualitative researcher needs to have as well, the ability to write in a way that captures an audience, right? Because I'm sure if you read, you have gone through papers and books where the writing is rather dull or too complicated that you just end up getting a headache and you don't feel like following through. And then there are some books that you can read that you don't even feel like you're reading because it's written so beautifully. So it's also one of the skills that a qualitative researcher must learn, is how to write in a creative way where you can synthesize ideas and you can write in an impactful way. So once you have written all of these different sections following these different guidelines, in the end, you have to make sure that you read again and check the flow of the paper. And when you are reading the flow of the paper, then you would understand, like, oh, okay, this is not really aligning with the rest of the paper. Then you need to go back and adjust, right? But at the end of the day, the whole paper has to flow in a way that it's like a very smooth river, right? That it's not like, oh, there's like rocks here and rocks there, and it's like taking different turns and etc. And the ideas are not coherent and it's not making sense altogether in a very consistent way. So you need to read again and make sure that it flows in a very consistent way. And pay attention to the details and see if there's any areas that needs to be more expanded or needs to be expanded. Like could be a literature area, it could be a discussion area where you feel that this statement is too short. I need to elaborate further what I mean by this. So you need to go back, read, and pay attention to these details and think not just from your perspective, but from the perspective of the author. Think about it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know much about this research. How would they read it, right? Check the language is very important. One of the main reasons why papers get rejected often is language errors, because if there is a lot of language errors, then it disturbs the reading flow, right? And it irritates the reader as well. And then it's always good to get another perspectives of your articles. You can ask your friend to read it. You can ask your colleague to read it. But it's always better to get perspective. I like to do this. I always have a few friends that I usually send out my papers to for them to read and give their very honest critical opinion about the paper, not just about the idea, but also about the writing style, the language, and etc. So these are some steps that you can follow as well in the end to make sure that you're in the right direction. So that's actually all for this lesson. I think it's been a very long lesson, and I hope you have followed through as well. And I know it was a very long lesson, but I wanted to give a detailed outline of what are some of the tips in writing these different sections of a journal article, and how to best write it so that you can go through the process of reviewing in a much better way without facing direct rejection. Oftentimes, if you produce these different sections in a very in very good quality, then and your research is of value, then you would have less problems in publishing qualitative work, right? So thank you very much for joining me in today for this lesson, and have a great day. Take care.